So welcome everybody. I know some of you may be connecting as we do our introductions, but I would like to welcome you from across Canada and thank you for joining us today, and also for all of you around the world. My name is Tina and I'm the Outreach and Partnerships Officer, and I'll be facilitating today's conversation. We're about to hear a conversation today about Cuso's Women Engaged for Human Dignity program in Northern Benin. But first, I would like to start off with a land acknowledgement from where I am. Toronto is the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and we're grateful to be able to work and live on this land. Our conversation today is part of International Day of the Girl 2020. It's approaching on October 11th, and the narrative and actions are for adolescent girls globally to assert their power as change makers, and the focus is in three key areas. One, to live free from gender-based violence and harmful practices. The second objective is to learn new skills towards the futures they choose. And finally, to lead as a generation of activists accelerating social change. These actions are central to Cuso International's strategic priority to advance gender equality and empower women and girls. And I just want to pause for a minute to let you know that the subject matter of Fgmc, female genital mutilation and cutting, may arouse emotions and reactions, but it involves a variety of areas from human rights, women's rights, body and gender-based violence to health, tradition, and culture. It is a particularly sensitive matter to tackle, and we have taken great care in honoring and respecting the young girls and women in this program. Joining us for the discussion today, we have Catherine Fortin-Lauzier, our Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Specialist. Catherine works closely with teams around the globe to ensure impact in promoting gender equality and inclusion in Cuso's programming. Catherine holds a master's in gender and feminist studies from the University of Ottawa, and she has a degree in international studies from Laval University. Her work has been focused on the promotion and recognition of diversity and gender equality in Canada and abroad. Welcome, Catherine. If you can just say hello so everyone can see you.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. We also have joining us Astrid Bucio, Health and Technical Advisor. Astrid holds a master's in political science from the University of Strasbourg III and a postgraduate degree in development studies from the University of Ottawa. She has over 20 years of experience in the field of international cooperation and has focused her work on education and health. Astrid has worked with the University of Ottawa, divisions of the United Nations, Inter-American Development Bank, the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, and Cuso International. She has worked in countries throughout Latin America and Africa. Astrid continues to work tirelessly to promote gender equality and human rights for all. Please say hello and welcome, Astrid.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you both. So just before we start, I know that there's probably a chat going on the sidebar, and I welcome that conversation. But if you want to have your questions considered during the question period, please put your question in the Q&A box. So once again, if you want your questions to be considered for the question period, please enter your question in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to it. You'll also be invited to participate in polls. So let me show you what that is and we'll ask you to participate right away. So I've just launched a poll and you should be seeing on your screen, again, for those of you using a computer, I know there may be some of you joining us by telephone. It asks, October 11th is International Day of the Girl. Will you be participating in any initiatives in support of International Day of the Girl? And so you have a selection of options. And I'll just leave this up very briefly. We have a lot to get to today. So I'll cut this off in a few seconds. Countdown from 5. Okay. And we'll come back to that response and how everybody participated momentarily. So that is what a poll looks like. So just continuing on, I think, before we get into our program, of Cuso's program in Northern Benin, context will be really helpful, and I believe the subject matter deserves that context and foundation. So maybe we'll start with Catherine. If you can please explain what FGMC is, female genital mutilation and cutting. Thank you. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you, Tina. Certainly. So, female genital mutilation and cutting. So we will be using the acronym throughout the webinar today. Fgmc is a practice that is present in various regions of the world and takes a variety of form. Usually, it involves removing or cutting all of a girl's clitoris or labia. And this is a practice that is usually done by an elder or a community member as part of, at times, like a ceremony celebrating the transition to puberty, or in preparation for marriage. Again, practices varies in different regions. International health organizations recognize 4 types that go from cutting the top part of the clitoris to what they call infibulation, a practice that cuts part of the labia and sew it together to leave a small opening for urination and menstrual blood passage. As I was saying, practices vary greatly from regions and community, and it is done to girls at different ages. So usually it's between 4 to 15, but in certain communities, including in Benin, where our project is taking place, this can be done within the first few weeks after birth, and then at times it's also done to older girls. So FGMC is referred to using a wide range of terms and expressions. So you can hear female genital mutilation, which is usually used to highlight the human rights violation of the practice, around so human rights violation of the practice. And female genital cutting can also be preferred in certain circumstances because it feels more respectful of the communities that practice it, and also remove some of the stigmatization behind the idea that parents intentionally mutilate their daughters, when we know that it's a much more complex combination of social factors and traditions that motivates them. Female circumcision is also a term that is used to describe the practice, and obviously there are terms that are used in local languages. For example, in the communities where we have this project in Benin, the words cutting and mutilation are actually the same one in the local language. So FGMC is a practice that has no health benefit for girls and women, and can rather cause severe health issues. Some complication can happen at the time of the intervention. So they include severe pain, excessive bleeding, swelling, fever, infections, urinary problems, shock, and even death. In the long term, it also causes other types of issues. So in urinary infections or painful urination, the creation of scar tissue, sexual problems, so pain, decreased satisfaction, increased risk of childbirth complications, and some women may even need surgeries later on. There are also some mental and emotional health implications, such as depression, anxiety, psychosexual problems, and in some instances, PTSD. So according to the World Health Organization, the cost of treating health implication of FGMC was $1.4 billion for 27 countries where we had the data available, so some of them are missing, only for 1 year. The year that they used for the study was 2018. FGMC is mostly carried out by traditional circumcisors. We often play a central role in communities. So in Benin, these women usually attend childbirth, they provide care to the newborn, they support mothers with their babies, as well as provide guidance on child education according to the tradition. You'll see that there are other regions of the world where healthcare providers could be performing FGMC due to the belief that the procedure is safer when medicalized. So what is behind a practice? So in some communities, it is seen as a way to prepare a girl for adulthood and marriage. So usually it was in a lot of context done around puberty. It is motivated by beliefs around acceptable sexual behavior, so to ensure premarital virginity and fidelity. It is also believed to reduce the women's libido and that it will discourage women from having extramarital sex. It is also associated with cultural ideals of femininity, including the notion that girls are clean and beautiful after the removal of body parts that are considered unclean, unfeminine, or even perceived as male. Like, for example, like a prominent clitoris or labia could be considered male features in some cultures. Other beliefs that it's more hygienic and will prevent sexually transmitted illnesses, or that it's necessary for the safe deliveries of babies. So again, very different meaning in different regions. And then many families and communities will perpetuate the practice as it is considered a tradition, a social convention. Since a wide number of girls and women have undergone the intervention in their communities, there is social pressure to do it by fear of being rejected. It's also a way to be accepted in the community and not marginalized, and increases chances for girls to get married. The social pressure is really what keeps the practice going, since some communities are aware of its impact on women and girls' health. The practice also has no base in religion, although some people use religion as a way to justify it. The practice predates the rise of Christianity or Islam, and religious leaders of all denominations have spoken out against it and have found no scripture or religious text to really justify it.
Thank you, Catherine. Sorry for the delay. That was jarring and shocking, but I believe it's very necessary to build on the context and to continue the conversation, just to understand the severity of the practice. So continuing along with context and building foundation, Astrid, we just heard that it's not something that is geographically located to one continent, that it's on all continents. And although Cuso focuses our work in Northern Benin, how prevalent globally is Fgmc?
Yes, thank you, Tina. So this practice is most common in some countries of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. But women and girls living with Fgmc can also be found in Latin America, Australia, Europe, and North America. There is direct and, because of migration, indirect prevalence. This is why we can consider this issue as being a global one, and one that calls for efforts at all levels. The information available indicates that Fgmc is concentrated in 29 countries, but is present in 92 countries. I also can mention the fact that there is a global trend towards banning the practice with the adoption of laws or decrees, but unfortunately, despite the existence of legislation against Fgmc, the tradition persists. The exact numbers of women and girls that have undergone Fgmc is uncertain, because not all countries where this practice takes place have available data regarding the prevalence. Nevertheless, UN agencies, among which UNICEF, UNFPA, WHO, have provided some estimates. And according to those sources, we have currently more or less 200 million women and girls living with Fgmc, and between 3 and 4 million of girls who are annually at risk of undergoing one form of the procedure. This number is rising because of the population growth among the demographic segment targeted by this practice. In Benin, the prevalence of Fgmc is higher in the north of the country. So Borgu, Alibori, and Donga are 3 departments or provinces with the highest rates. And according to the data collected for the program being implemented by Cuso, the overall self-reported prevalence in Benin is 13%, but in the 2 departments covered by the program, the rate is way higher. For Borgu, the prevalence is 53.7%, and for Alibori, it's 42.7%. Now, I would like to draw your attention on some trends that are being discussed by organizations working on this issue. So despite all efforts deployed at the national, regional, and international level to put an end to this practice, preoccupying trends have made their appearance. First, there is a cross-border dimension of FGMC. This is one strategy that communities adopt to avoid persecution and ensure that FGMC is done in secret. It has driven African states to discuss regional frameworks to fight this, but there is still no harmonized disposition or implementation of concerted actions. Something that I would like to mention, though, is that the law in Benin includes provisions that prohibit cross-border FGMC. Another growing trend is the medicalization of female genital cutting, as mentioned by Catherine. And it's one that poses the greatest threat to its abandonment. So traditional cutters are being replaced by healthcare providers who carry this procedure in public and private clinics, but also at home. The reasoning for this is that FGM can be performed in a more hygienic and safer context. But this is ignoring the fact that no matter what, women will eventually suffer at some point in their life of sexual, psychological, and obstetrical complications. What I want to add here is that medical professional associations are, of course, rallying against this and are calling their members to fight the practice. A third disturbing trend is that this intervention is being carried on younger girls below the age of 5. In most cultures, as Catherine was mentioning, FGM is a tradition to mark the passage of girls into adulthood and ensure that they are marriageable, a key step to ensure social and financial security. But what has been observed is that in some communities, younger girls are going through the procedure as a way to minimize the trauma associated with the practice, but also because it's easier to conduct this ritual in secret. I want to balance this dark picture by also mentioning 3 positive trends that are being observed. First, number of survivors who are breaking the silence and are leading advocacy campaigns in their countries and outside of their countries. Their testimonies are powerful and are being supported by activists, opinion leaders, civil society organizations, and decision makers. A second one is that work at the community level is showing that it's possible to abandon this harmful practice. Alternative rites of passage are being developed and adopted in partnership with religious leaders. Third, that efforts made to engage and mobilize boys and men in the fight against FGMC are being successful. Men have shown that they can be strong allies in the fight against this tradition. So as we saw, FGM is a widespread practice which requires global effort if we want to eradicate it. There are some regional initiatives focused on this fight, such as the Salima campaign launched by the African Union. I also wanted to remind you that one of the SDGs, more specifically goal number 5 and target 5.3, that goal is calling for the complete elimination of FGMC by 2030. Taking into account that we only have 10 years to achieve this goal, surveillance monitoring bodies suggest that we concentrate our efforts on 5 critical areas. First, that we intensify work at the community level to support change from within. Second, that we engage in additional research on this issue. Third, that we pay attention to survivors and ensure that they have access to support and services they need. Fourth, that we ensure that strategies consider and address the emerging trends that I mentioned before. And fifth, that we secure additional financial resources for this issue. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Astrid and Catherine. That really, built the foundation for us to continue the conversation going forward. And now I would like to do a bit of a shift. In 2019, Cuso International, as the only Canadian INGO, was trusted to introduce a standalone program to address this practice in Northern Benin. So let's get into the program a little bit. So Catherine, can you share with us what the Women for Human Dignity program is all about?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Tina. So Cuso's team in Benin is delivering this project with the objective of reducing the prevalence of gender-based violence with a particular focus on Fgmc. So they are taking a community approach to changing perceptions at the community level so that they can really support them put an end to the practice. So the project is taking place at 8 communes, so towns or villages in the departments of Bourgou and Alibori in the north of the country. So these regions, they share a border with Burkina Faso, Niger, and Nigeria. And they have targeted, we have targeted areas where the persistence of the practice is higher than others. So to understand the context in which it's taking place, and I know Astrid has mentioned it earlier, but it's useful to know again that Benin passed laws prohibiting the practice in 2003 and 2004, and that in 2005, the government and local NGOs declared the official abandonment of the practice in all of Benin. Although it's been really great to have a legal framework to support change, it had the unintended consequences of hiding the practice rather than stopping it. So the practice is still alive, but since people fear repression, they found ways to continue it either in hiding or will travel to other villages or even countries near or far to do it, and where the practice might not be illegal. Once they passed the law, the government did not plan any action or intervention to work at the community level, and there has been a lack of funding for local organizations to plan interventions to stop Fgmc. So another explanation of why the practice is so persistent is that because of the social and community nature of the practice in Benin, traditional approaches to wide-scale sensitization, which have been done, are not the most appropriate for behavior change at the individual and the community level. So with that in mind, our teams, our partners had to take a bit of a different approach to support the communities. So they conducted a gender analysis, they did an immersion study, and a persistence study. These have helped identify, some of the reasons for the practice, to really understand how often it is still practiced, and identified region where it's more prevalent. The immersion study was really helpful in gathering information on the different forces in presence, identify potential allies, opponents, and people who are still maybe indecisive regarding the practice. So we'll talk a little bit more about that because those are very interesting studies that we've done so far. So, so after this, so will the real intervention of the project. So our teams are engaging and increasing participation of women and girls in the fight against gender-based violence and Fgmc. So they're providing skills and knowledge to women and girls leaders, including survivor of gender-based violence and also former circumcisers, to reinforce their leadership and also to train them on facilitation and intervention technique on the topic of gender-based violence and Fgmc. This allows to center at the heart of the project their participation in the planning and also the decision-making, and reinforce their capacity to become agents of change in the fight against gender-based violence and Fgmc, as they will be, and they've started already, leading dialogues at the community level on these practices. The women and girls that are agents of change in the project are local activists, so they come from these areas, but also girls at risk of undergoing the practice or that have already taken a stance against it. And they are also supported by a group of men and boys who support the activities for the project, and we're obviously allies. So they are each working in their own communities where they can affect the most change. So in order to see individual change with the support of the women and girl leaders and to create social norm change, it is really essential to involve the communities. So the project also organizes trainings, workshops, meetings with members of the community, leaders and representatives of formal and informal organizations at the community level. Using an approach based on social mediation, this helps understand the social reasoning for the practice, share the impact of gender-based violence and Fgmc on women and girls, because in some of the communes where the project is happening, they have found that there's very low understanding of the impact. So that's one of the aspects that the project is working on. And then also we're also supporting the identification of remediation and creating a large community mobilization around the topic. So it's important for the project to mobilize a large number of people in the communes to ensure there is wide support for the elimination of the practice. And these interventions also have the advantage so in these interventions, we're also taking advantage of the opportunity to engage these leaders and people from the community on other topics such as gender equality, positive masculinities, sexual and reproductive health and rights for women and girls, and to encourage them to promote more positive cultural practices. So the project also used more traditional communication campaigns by creating interactive shows on topics related to women and girls' rights, gender equality, or Fgmc on the community radio stations. Another area of the intervention is to improve government practices and public institutions in the two regions in the promotion of the abandonment of Fgmc and other forms of gender-based violence. So the project is working very closely with the Ministry of Social Affairs, but also requires the involvement of the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health. So these ministries, technical departments are actively involved, and they provide leadership in some activities so that we can guarantee buy-in and their future capacity to promote positive practices beyond the scope of the project. The project is also training health and education professionals so that they can integrate prevention of gender-based violence and Fgmc in their practice, and also work closely with health and education administrators so they promote, support, and can evaluate initiatives that fight against gender-based violence and Fgmc. So we're not alone in this project. Cuso has quite a lot of experience and a very strong team in Benin, but we have local partners that are working with us in this during this project. So one of them is Equife, and the other one is called APEM. So Equife is an organization that has been founded in 1999 and has a vast experience in sensitization against sexual and gender-based violence and Fgmc, and it has also great experience engaging national and international volunteers. They also have experience working to reduce other forms of harmful cultural practice, for example, early marriages. They're based in Parakou, one of the main city in the region, where they mobilize catalyzers, especially women leaders, to create sensitization on a large scale. And then APEM, the other partner for the project, was funded in 1993 and works to protect children's rights. And they have also a really strong presence in Alibori and Borgou, so the two regions for the project. They were the first organization to start working on gender-based violence in the region, and they created what they called alert committees on gender-based violence and Fgmc in the communities. And just on the final note, maybe on the project, so to ensure the sustainability of the project and of the two partner organization, we're also engaging highly skilled volunteers. They will be providing support to APEM and to Equife to strengthen their organizational skill and management practices throughout the project, and to ensure that those they can continue the fight after the end of the project.
Thank you. Thank you, Catherine. That was very informative on the work that Cuso is doing in Benin. I just want to pause for a second and remind everybody that if you're using the chat, which I see is coming up quite a bit, if it's a question that you want to have considered for the Q&A, to please put it in the Q&A box. And I should have mentioned in the beginning, I apologize, my colleague who usually kind of fields some of the chat or questions that come in through the chat box is not with me today, and I'm focusing on this. So I apologize if I'm not getting back to you. I see people raising their hand and all different kinds of activities. We will do our best to do it through the Q&A. So once again, if you can kind of, if it's a comment or whatnot, that's fine. But if it's a question, to use the Q&A box. And again, I apologize for not responding to you. I know there's many of you on the line. Again, thank you, Catherine. And just before we continue on again with Astrid into the conversation, we have a short video from our colleague in Benin. Her name is Esther Tasiba Diego. And I just want to mention that Esther did the video outside, so there's a little bit of background noise, but you should be able to clearly understand Esther.
Hi everyone, I'm Esther Tasiba Diego, Program Manager working for Cuso in Benin. I'm working on FEDI projects. FEDI project objective is to reduce gender-based violences and female genital mutilation in Northern Benin. By doing what? By increasing women, girls, and their communities' participation in the fight and enhancing the government and public institution engagement toward the abandonment of these practices. Women and girls see in this project a lifeline for it is silent pain that have lasted too long. Our strategy is to raise awareness about the harm of these practices and to get communities questioning themselves and finding indigenous strategy to effectively fight against these phenomena. Girls and women are very committed and hope that their pain will eventually find a solution through FEDI projects. What is important to know and keep about FEDI is that it is a unique opportunity to get girls and women to take care of themselves and refuse to undergo these treatments which endanger their health and violate their dignity. We start from the root causes of female genital mutilation to uproot it permanently, and we hope you guys will join us for the victory.
So thank you, Esther. I think you're on the call today, so welcome. We just heard you reinforce the importance of the program. So the French acronym that Cuso uses is FEDI, so that's why you heard her mention the FEDI program. But she also spoke about the underlying commitment to advancing women's rights and eradicating Fgmc. So moving along with Astrid and bringing the Benin context into play with COVID-19, maybe you can bring in that Benin context as well as explain to us what the program has achieved so far.
Thank you, Tina. So what we have achieved so far, first I would like to point out that we're halfway through this initiative and that COVID has forced Cuso and the partners to slow down and adjust the program's work plan. But despite the situation, we have results and stories to share. So one first activity that took place and that I think is worth mentioning is the baseline data collection. Some of you are probably familiar with this type of activity, but for those who are not, well, the idea is to gather information which will allow us to measure results and impact later as we compare data collected at the beginning with data collected at the end. This is usually something we do at the start of a new program. So this activity involved the conduct of surveys, focus groups, and interviews in the regions selected for Cuso's program. The field analysis also looked at the role of stakeholders in the areas of the program in relation to Fgmc, and we are here referring to community organizations, both formal and informal, health and schooling services, local government, police, etc. This exercise also included the assessment of the capacity of 224 women and girls between the age of 14 and 60. And the idea there was to assess their capacity to play a frontline role in the fight against Fgmc. I wanted to make emphasis on three interesting findings that came out of that baseline study. The first finding is that according to the general sense of the people surveyed with respect to the law that Catherine mentioned earlier, and which was adopted in 2003 to fight Fgmc, well, this law, according to the people, this law did not put an end to the practice. And instead, it pushed the practice into secrecy, into hiding. So traditional cutters continue to perform Fgmc in the program area. They are doing it at night. Ceremonies are being organized at the family level and no more at the community level in order to control the flow of information. Cutters may perform Fgmc in villages where they are not known, so it's an anonymous activity, and some families are crossing the border to avoid persecution. The other thing that came out is that denunciation is seen as something that has a social cost too high to pay. Villagers that are against Fgmc will keep quiet because they prefer to maintain cordial relationships with members of their community. So we see here that the strategy in Benin had a repressive aspect and that didn't serve the cause. The second thing that I wanted to mention and that came out from that study was the fact that the study analyzed social dynamics and the role of what they called the strategic groups. Those groups were men, women, elders, leaders, teachers, youth, and how they felt about Fgmc. And what came out is that mothers and grandmothers play the most important role in the continuity or abandonment of this rite, this ritual. Grandmothers in particular, because they are perceived as the custodians of the tradition, play a critical role in the decision, next to another group that is also very important to consider, the traditional leaders. So you may ask about the role of men in this. Well, according to the surveys, they are seen as the ones that will mobilize the financial resources required, but the organization of the ceremonies are in the hands of women. The third finding that I wanted to share is that in the project area, 49% of the girls that are submitted to Fgmc undergo the procedure before they turn 5 years old. Effective strategies will need to take this into consideration because younger girls are harder to reach. The second activity that took place in the program and that I wanted to discuss here was what Catherine mentioned earlier and what was known as the Immersion Phase. The name of this activity describes well what took place. A group of 15 to 17 facilitators, men and women, half and half, from the two Cuso local partners were sent to the villages in the selected regions. They were supposed to spend 2 weeks, but in fact they stayed 4 weeks in total. And the idea was for them to understand better the social dynamics around Fgmc in those villages and to ensure that Cuso's program was relevant to the context. So the mandate of the facilitators during this immersion phase was very clear. They were asked to identify leaders among the strategic groups. They were asked to identify challenges in each village, familiarize themselves with cultural practices, identify potential actions to mobilize the community. So Cuso's program is very much about community engagement against Fgmc. This phase was important because the implementing organizations and the facilitators needed to understand the context and identify some favorable elements to a constructive community dialogue on an issue difficult to discuss openly. They also had to identify leaders or potential leaders and assess what needed to be done in order to strengthen their capacities, because these women and girls are the ones that will drive, encourage, and facilitate community dialogues around social norms and traditions such as Fgmc. Feedback from the facilitators following this phase confirmed most of, if not all, the information contained in the baseline study. One interesting account from this group had to do with a list of existing favorable factors to the abandonment of Fgmc in the program's region. So these facilitators commented that during their stay in the village, they came across with women leaders who were vocal against this practice. They came across youth more aware of health risk associated with FGM and who are less favorable. They also met families who have decided to drop this tradition and who are starting to talk. And also they felt that public perception of women who have not been cut is changing. So these findings are very encouraging. They make us feel that there is momentum in the area for such an initiative. Supporting the leadership of women and girls could be an effective way to convince communities to abandon this harmful practice. The findings of this field analysis were used to finalize the first set of trainings which took place as part of the Cuso program in the two regions. One first training benefited 400 women and girls who participated in a leadership workshop designed to strengthen and boost their leadership. These same 400 women and girls participated in workshops focused on effective communication and facilitation techniques. This in view of the support that they will be providing as part of this program to community dialogues about traditions and social norms that perpetuate gender inequality. Workshops on gender equality were planned but had to be postponed due to COVID. They are supposed to take place in the coming months. So as you can see, Cuso's program is really about supporting change from within. Thanks, Tina.
Thank you, Astrid, and thank you for bringing the context of COVID into play. Looks like we've moving forward and doing a lot, but there are some delays happening. So just before we continue on, I would like to just share the first poll results with you. And so the question was asked around supporting or participating, I should say, in activities. And it's pretty even split down the middle. So I think you can all see the poll results there. And I'll stop sharing and continue our conversation. So now I have a special guest. That's right, a special guest is Lori Bucio, Cuso International's Resource Development Director. She visited the program site last year. You'll only hear Lori's voice, you won't see her video. But welcome, Lori. This is your cue. And if you can briefly share your experience and your travels in Northern Benin with us.
Thanks so much, Tina. Yes, I did have the opportunity to visit the region where Cuso was working last December. I, along with two of my colleagues, Ernestine and Kimba from our Cuso office, traveled to the city of Parakou and then on to Kandy, and that's located in Northern Benin. This is a remote area, let me tell you, and the travel options were very limited for us on how we would access the communities. We ended up driving on a two-lane highway that took us approximately 12 hours to reach before nightfall. So it wasn't an easy travel to get there, but well worth it. Once I arrived in Kandy, I had the chance to meet with our partners, APEM and Equifi, along with community elders, both men and women, who are working with Cuso to educate the communities on this long held practice. I have to say the trust that our partners and my colleagues were able to gain from the communities to allow such visits around sensitive and honest dialogue was just a true testament to the community collaborative approach that they were able to implement. Once we were on our way visiting the communities, we had the opportunity to meet two women who had been subjected to the practice as young girls and are now involved in the effort to educate others in their community. They reconfirmed to us that while this practice is still very ingrained in their culture, education is key for helping all members of their community understand the impact of Fgmc. One of the greatest challenges that we heard as well in raising awareness around Fgmc is that many girls are shamed into silence. When they feel they need to, if they want to speak up, they might be socially shunned in their communities. And this is just one of the issues that this project is helping mitigate. I was there for 2 days and I had the privilege to meet so many community members, from midwives to healthcare professionals, elders, many women and girls, men, and there wasn't one meeting or visit that didn't end with a community member stating, the goal is that the next generation will not have to endure this practice. Those words have stayed with me. Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Lori. So I don't know how to continue on after that, but thank you for sharing your personal reflections with us. I will go to the second poll, and I won't make you wait. We'll do the second poll right away as it launches. So you heard Astrid and Catherine and Lori talk about the different approaches that Cuso is taking. So this poll is reflective of that question. When it comes to eradicating Fgmc in Benin, what approach is Cuso International taking? And I see all of you have paid great attention, so thank you for that. I'll just leave it open for a couple more seconds. I know there's hundreds of you on the line, so. And I'll close it in 5, 4, because we want to get to your questions. Okay, and I'll share those results. So yes, it is definitely our intervention and approach to involve our communities, work with training and intervention, and obviously our local partnerships are key. So now it's your turn. There's a lot that you've probably heard, and maybe there's some things that you haven't heard. So this is your opportunity. As you're putting your questions, again, a reminder in the Q&A box, we will have a good 10, 12 minutes to get through some questions. So the question did come in advance. We had 2 questions in advance, but to give you live questions more time, I will only go to 1 advanced question. And I think I'll go to a question around tradition and culture. So thank you for the advanced question. They ask, since Fgmc is part of a cultural tradition, can it still be condemned and eliminated? So I think, Catherine, you're best suited to answer that one. And you're, yeah, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tina. It's definitely, so because we're wanting to be, I think, respectful of, different, and consider that, things are different in different parts of the world. And it's easy for, let's say, me from North America to, look at an unfamiliar practice and say that, this is not okay, because not something that I'm familiar with, to judge it. But I think in this situation, I mean, when we're using a human rights framework, definitely we can look at it and see that it's comes in contradiction with, rights to live a life, child protection, for example, a right to health, body integrity. So there are certain rights that come at play, universal rights that come at play here. But also, I think we can also realize that, you know, it's not just us seeing this, but there are people within the community that are also, you know, ready to change the practices at the local level, and that are looking for other ways to, you know, celebrate maybe a passage to adulthood, right? And some successful intervention, and this is what our team on the ground is doing with the communities, helping them figure out, but was to find, you know, some communities have been very successful at finding ways to redefine, you know, what that rite of passage to, you know, adulthood for girls could look like. And also, you know, having discussions around what the norms are around femininity, or, you know, fidelity or womanhood look like, so that these practices can be questioned, and then maybe redefine what that looks like, and find new ways to celebrate, you know, that these girls are growing and becoming women in a way that respects their rights, obviously. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Catherine. We have a really interesting question here. So it says, for the traditional Fgmc practitioners in any society, it may be a source of income. And they ask, what is Cuso's intervention to work with this group? So great question, and that moving forward, how are we changing those customs, and how are we supporting through an economic model potential practitioners who were earning income from this practice? And I don't know who's best suited to answer that, Catherine or Astrid.
Do you, maybe I can start a little bit, and then if Astrid, you have something to add, you can go. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize the microphone. But I know that in some of the preparation we've done for this study, and that might be very specific to the context in Benin, but we're working with, in French they say the word exciseurs. It's circumciser is people who basically do, the elders who do the practice. Some of them are working with us to change mentality. So we have, you know, they're involved in the project. We have found that the economic, and that might be again specific to this situation, because there are some very interesting interventions that have worked. But in this setting, the economic argument wasn't really one that even, there had been some intervention to try to, you know, replace their income, find new activities for them to gain, make money basically, but that it was more the demand at the community level that was still there, that was keeping them practicing, and not the fact that they necessarily needed an income. So that's what we're working on with the communities in this context, mostly. I hope that answers the question. I don't know, Astrid, if you want.
We'll just go to another question, because there's so many here with hundreds of people being on the board. I just want to correct a terminology. Some listener heard circumcisters, and no, that was incorrect. It was circumcisers. So there, I know there's a sound similarity, but it was circumcisers, not circumcisters. And so just continuing on, I think this is a great question to bring in partnerships and Cuso's model around partnerships. It says, how do we select, or how do you select which local partners would be a good fit to work with? So maybe Astrid, because I think Catherine's voice is used up a bit. How does Cuso International select our local partners to work with, or who would be the best fit for our different projects, this concerning our Benin project?
Well, I think that partners select Cuso as much as Cuso selects the partners. So it's really a two-way street. So it's looking at mandates and ensuring that the mandates of both organizations are coincide, have the same objectives, have the same vision, and then it's really a discussion about how we can collaborate together. So it's not really Cuso choosing; it's really two entities choosing each other, more or less.
Thank you. So there's lots of questions here. I think we have enough for maybe 2 or 3 more. Thank you. Good day to you as well. It says good day to all. To what extent does Fgmc conform to be a belief of those who practice it. And I think maybe, Catherine, you can just allude to your top discussion around it not being within any religious practice or whatnot, but maybe you can just reinforce some of that messaging. So the question is around conforming to beliefs around the practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, as I've been trying to explain, I hope I just that was clear. But in every community has a different interpretation of why they're doing it, right? Like you can even within a country, a same country or a same region, like you'll find different interpretations around it because it is really anchored at the community level, right? And so it's interesting because people from the same religion could have different interpretation of it, or reasoning why they're doing, or even practice it in completely different ways. And this is why you see, you know, there are different types of Fgmc. Like it's, you know, for some people you have to have type 4, and that might be, you know, in their mind justified by, you know, their religious practice. But in reality, there haven't been any, you know, messaging from the religion to really say that this is mandatory or this is something that people should be doing. So it's really beliefs at the traditional beliefs. And I think, I don't know if we've mentioned this, but Fgmc actually was found on bodies of, I think it was Egyptian mummies. So way before the rise of, you know, Christianity or Islam. And it is found in different, you know, within like Jewish, Christian and Muslim communities. So it's really not tied to a specific religion, but more beliefs at the local level.
Thank you, Catherine. So I just want to acknowledge, again, there's people from around the world and across Canada from coast to coast to coast. So welcome Victoria, BC, Michigan, and all the other countries around the world. Just wanted to highlight a comment that was sent in. Dignity of women in the society is paramount to every woman, having the right to live in dignity, free of fear of coercion, violence, or discrimination. And they also have the right to health, sexual health, and reproductive health. So thank you for the comments that you brought in. I think we'll go to one more question we have before we close. And this question is around kind of law enforcement of institutions. So they ask, are courts and law enforcement institutions involved in any form in this project? Do you think their agents are authentic about ending the practice and criminalization of the perpetrators? Great question. Thank you for that. So again, the question is around courts and law enforcement institutions involved in any of these projects. Does Cuso have that support departmentally? And do we think that their agents or their actors are authentic about ending the practice and criminalizing perpetrators? Maybe Astrid, I know you spoke about maybe the global context of that form or any laws or enforcement with the Benin project.
Yeah, I think that I mentioned that laws are being adopted by most countries where this practice takes place, even, well, and other countries too. The problem is always the implementation of the law and equipping the courts and the police with tools to really prosecute. So yeah, there's still work to be done, and some countries are ahead, some countries are behind, lagging. It's resources, not only human resources and financial resources that are still needed to really implement those laws. But as we saw with Benin, if we only have laws, well, that doesn't do it, because what we saw in Benin is that the law did not prevent this practice to continue to persist.
Thank you. So I'm really sorry. I'm just looking at the time and I don't want to go too much over. I want to reassure you, for those of you who did not get your questions answered live, we will be working our way through them and getting back to you. So once again, we will be working our way through them and getting back to you. So please be patient and know that you will get a response from Cuso International on your question. We just don't have the capacity or time right now. So I would like to thank Astrid and Catherine for your participation, and Lori and Esther. And I would like to leave any final words, 30 seconds, because we are running out, with Astrid and Catherine. Any final words to our Cuso community?
Well, I think that if when we want to achieve something, deadlines are good, and I think that SDGs set the deadline of 2030 to eliminate this practice. I believe that we all have a role to play in this fight, and I think that self-educating about this issue is certainly a good first step to take. So that would be my take for this.
Yes, and I completely agree with you, Astrid. I think I would just add like a big thank you for everyone who's here and self-educating, right? This is a topic that, I mean, we hear sporadically, and in my case about when I'm not looking at the project, obviously. So it's always good to, hear about like how it's going. And I think this project really shows us the power of the communities at the center of the project, but all around the world, right, that are fighting to bring new practices. So it's definitely, I don't know, I look forward to seeing where the communities take their project in the coming years.
Thank you. So as we've learned today that Fgmc is still practiced on every continent, including remote communities in Northern Benin. With your support, we can shift that power and help reduce the number of girls who are subject to this human rights violation and really make change happen. In closing, please stay connected with Cuso International through our social media platforms, our website. You see it on your screen right now. You will be receiving a short survey. We appreciate if you take the 2 minutes to answer it. You'll also be receiving the recording of today's town hall. A reminder, you will get your questions answered. It may take us some time, but you will hear from us. And I invite you to come back on November 25th. We'll have a French version of this town hall with our country representatives in Benin, so Ernestine Denamy and Esther Tessiba Diego. So please come back if you speak French on November 25th. Thank you for supporting Cuso International's gender equality programming. As my colleague Esther said in her video, when it comes to ending Fgmc, we hope you'll join us for the victory. In solidarity, bye for now.